So now it is time for our big panel of the day. This one is about amplifying worship through audiovisual artistry. And I'm excited to talk to these two panelists about the innovative ways that technology can harmonize with spirituality in houses of worship, what we can do with sound and visuals to engage people who go to these different congregational experiences, and a little bit about, this weird kind of separation we're having of like, are we joining online? Are we going in person? What's happening? How can AV help? So I'm going to go ahead and bring on our panelists now. Welcome to Bob Narstadt and Luke Jordan. How's it going, guys?
It's very good today. Thank you.
Doing just fine.
So, first things first, I'm going to just have you guys talk a little bit about who you are and what you do and your experience in the industry. Bob, do you want to start us off?
Sure. My name is Bob Narstadt, and I'm a principal designer, and I've been a part of an organization called Clark for almost 20 years. And we have started from the ground up in the late 90s, focusing on house of worship technology applications. And so we've been doing that. I'm here in our office in Alpharetta, Georgia. We're about an hour north of Atlanta.
Cool. Luke, what about you?
I'm the CEO and second generation owner of Electroacoustics. So we're a family business in Fort Worth, Texas. Really kind of cut our teeth on house of worship projects, and as we've added performing arts and corporate stadiums and arenas to our portfolio, we still do a heck of a lot of churches and have really enjoyed that. And so we're design build is the majority of our work, and that's been going really well.
Very cool. So let's kind of start big picture. So how do you both see the role of AV evolving when it comes to enhancing worship experiences, kind of in the coming months and maybe even year or years? Luke, do you want to go first?
Sure. For worship, I view AV as a supporting cast member.
Mhm.
It is never meant to be, uh, and it's not an entertainment. It is there to enhance. So again, the ability to use lighting to produce an emotional response, to lead people through the different phases of worship, to understand what's happening with light, to be able to hear, to see, to enhance, to connect multiple campuses, to broadcast, archive, record. Yeah, all of that is not the point, but we're not able to make our point without it. I don't see that changing. I think the evolution is just going to continue to how do we do that better, faster, cheaper?
Yeah.
And I think in 10 years, that is going to still be the case of AV and how it's evolving.
Mhm.
Go ahead, Bob.
Sure, I can add. What I can add to that is, we have been a part of the work to use audiovisual and theatrical lighting technologies in worship experiences for a long time. And what we can continue to see is exactly what Luke was saying. People are using it to implement their programming. We've said for a long time that successful implementations of audiovisual technology start with the people who are in the congregation and on the staff, and then those people having a strong understanding of who they are and what they're trying to accomplish, and then implementing the technologies to support that. We see there's a continuing evolution, though, in the understanding of how the technology actually works. So especially, let's say over the last 10 years, as webcasting and streaming has become more prevalent, people are understanding that you don't get a good webcast until you have a good picture, and you don't have a good picture until you have good lighting and good camera technology, right? So everything is interconnected, and everything still goes back to who are our people and what are we trying to accomplish, and then it supports that. But it is continuing to get more sophisticated as
Mhm.
more and more churches understand how every Lego block interconnects together to create a final result.
Now, I think an evolution you are seeing is that more of the, you've got your high-end churches, you've got your mega churches, your high production value churches. I know in Texas, we've got a bunch of cowboy churches, and they spend as much as they do on their arena as they do inside the sanctuary. And that is very much part of their culture and what their focus is. But those more kind of middle of the market churches are starting to evolve their budget. They are starting to align, well, this is what we want to do, and their understanding of what that is actually going to cost. And instead of hearing that's a ridiculous number, thank you for your time, I'm going to go find someone that will do what I want for the budget I want,
Right.
and maybe being disappointed by that, they are starting to be more aware of what the actual cost is, and are starting to budget for that, plan for that, or even after a big capital campaign, they are starting to have a healthy budget to maintain their AV spend throughout the year. So I think that has been evolving, is continuing to take more of a front seat. And people don't always want to talk about budget when they talk about how is worship changing, but that's the big primary driver, is understanding the cost before you start making changes.
I 100% agree. We're seeing the same thing where people are starting, for a long time, people felt like, well, the technology is just too expensive. I'll find a cheaper way to do it. Right. And, well, I could just use my iPhone as a camera or whatever. Right. And so, then what they found out is that the results just didn't match the expectations. And so they started to realize that, oh, if I'm going to, connect with my audience in a way that's consistent and acceptable to the audience, where they'll stay engaged, they're realizing it takes more things. So, for example, people can start to find out, well, I'm just going to buy a more, I don't want to use my iPhone as a camera, so I'm going to buy a more expensive camera. But then they still get a result they're not happy with. Well, then they realize, oh, I need to add more lighting, right? And so then after kind of running into these
but then they've got to add a transformer, and they've got to add more circuits, and they've got to get a power sequencer, and then they can have more lighting.
But the understanding that it's not as simple as people thought it would be is becoming more prevalent and more acceptable, and budgets are becoming more aligned with what it really takes to accomplish what they want to do. And also some are starting to say, well, is this something we really want to do? Is this really strategic to who we are, who are our people, who are our congregation? What do we need to accomplish? I just saw a social media post of a church that's just like, we're going to discontinue our Sunday morning live streams, because they were finding that it was, as it's become, especially in a post-COVID world where everybody got used to going to church online because they had to, a lot of church attendance had dropped. And then coming back out of COVID now for 3 or 4 years, they were finally just going like, is the Sunday morning experience that we have in the room, is trying to replicate that online really strategically who we are, who our people are, or, is a big part of, I think what churches, some of them are discovering now, is that the community aspect of what happens when people come together is significant to who they are. And so some people are starting to say, well, do I need to spend a lot of money to produce the best TV program? Or do I put my resources into creating the best environment here, and then still capturing elements of that, and maybe using social media to engage prospective audience or to keep people updated, but not trying to say, hey, our experience takes place in both places. It takes place online and it takes place in room. And that's a small portion, but it's something that I've seen lately this year getting more. I've had more and more discussions with our customers about, hey, we want to get people back in the building. What do we do about that?
How do we do that? Yeah, that's interesting. We have a question from the audience already, which I love. You guys keep them coming. By the way, the Q&A is directly to our right if you are looking at us in your video window. Yeah, keep asking questions. I love audience questions. So this one is from Greg. He asked, is church elder pushback regarding TV and church still a thing? Is that something either of you have noticed?
I don't know if it's even leadership driven. Most churches have a committee when it comes to AV. Typically, you don't have just an elder or a deacon who is the sole perspective or champion. But being committee driven it's going to be consensus driven. And what we say around our office is if we have a discussion and no one has an opposing viewpoint, we don't know enough about the topic to make a decision yet. Because without tension, without dissent, if everyone is just automatically rowing in the same direction, something's not right. And so, uh, let's talk about live streaming, like you were talking about, Bob. You're typically trying to do one of two things. You're trying to grow the church, and so many people are church shopping online instead of, well, this Sunday I'll go check out this church, and next Sunday I'll check out that church. I've just moved to the area and I'm trying to find a church home. Instead, people are just church shopping online, and they might be able to check out services live or throughout the week and then decide where they want to come in person that next Sunday. And so having a polished broadcast where it looks good, it's consistent, things aren't shaking, you can see, you can hear, that's important to welcome people and make them feel invited and that they want to come. On the other hand, is if you've got an elderly community and they can't come in, or if people are sick or they're traveling on the road, but they don't want to miss the ability to connect with people, that's a fantastic resource. Or even some folks have moved and they're not really willing to put down roots just yet, and they still want to connect with their previous community. Having that broadcast is really important, but how you approach those two is very different. I'd say if you're trying to bring people in, your marketing team is going to have to be very active, and that's, you're trying to bring people in. Whereas if people are worshiping from home, you're really pushing it to them, and so the budgets and who is managing that is going to be very different. So there should be a good tension of understanding before we pick a budget or the product, why are we doing this, and are we prepared to manage that appropriately? And there should be some natural tension around that discussion.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So let's go back to some other questions that I had. You kind of both touched on this already, but I wanted to kind of address some common challenges that come up when you're integrating like audio, video, lighting systems into different houses of worship, and what is the best way that you guys have found to address these? Bob, do you want to start us off this time?
Well, I think the important thing is, again, it always goes back to who are we? What are we trying to accomplish? Are we looking at our in-room experience? Are we looking at how we're connecting with people outside? What is the specific technology to do that? And, budgets will dictate a lot of things and how all that happens. But also then looking at things from a holistic perspective. And by that, I'm saying, like all of these disciplines are interconnected together. And I know traditionally people have looked at it as audio, video, lighting, but you know what? Today it's audio, video, lighting, and networking, right? So the networks are the systems in 2024. So there's a whole new complexity there. Understanding what it is, who we are, what we're trying to do, understanding what are the resources we have to keep a system up and going. What kind of people do we have? I mean, I have conversations with people all the time, and I always say, hey, just like when my kids were little, you have to be this tall to ride the ride.
Yeah.
Right. So how tall are you, and how many people do you have to keep a very sophisticated system going? And sometimes those conversations will lead to, well, we can't do what we thought we want to do, because if we do it, we're going to get in trouble because we can't keep it going. How do we afford to maintain it from, capital expenses of maintenance and ongoing expenses of maintenance? Are there ongoing fees related to things? So looking at everything from a holistic picture and understanding who you are, what you can do, that's been a real successful thing for us lately.
Nice.
Now, what I would add to that too is the design process has to be followed, and it is a process. So again, it, like Bob said, it really does always start with who are you and why are you doing this. But if we want to improve the way that things sound in the room, okay, what type of denomination are you? And the reverberance time of the room needs to be specific to the style of worship you're doing. If the organ is the most important thing in the room, your acoustics are going to be greater than 2 seconds. If you are doing contemporary worship and percussion is really important, you're going to be below 1.3 seconds on your RT60. And then if you're somewhere in the middle, you're not best at anything, but you're pretty good at everything as far as speech intelligibility and music go. But you have chosen to make that compromise, and that's likely a budgetary decision. Um, but understanding that good speakers don't sound great in an acoustically poor room, you've got to either decide at the outset of a project, how are we going to address that? And should the acoustics look pretty or should they be functional? Which comes down to who are we, what's our budget, and how do we want people to feel when they come into our room, and how do they see and hear those things and perceive us? And so that's also different for new construction versus a renovation. A renovation, the AV contractor and maybe their electrical sub is kind of the only person working in the room, and it's just going to be kind of figured out, and then we're going to do it. Working through an architectural design process on new construction, uh, it's faced in an entirely different way, and that's typically handled through a series of meetings and meeting notes and revisions to drawings. But having that process, and I love the way you said it, Bob, a holistic view of these are interconnected systems, upgrading the speakers and not adjusting the acoustics isn't always going to be the biggest impact for the dollar.
Good point. So, what are other key considerations when it comes to selecting the right technology solutions? Like, of course, you have to start with who are we, what are we doing, but what are a few other ones that you guys think are important? And whoever wants to take it can go first.
You got it, Bob.
Luke. Oh.
Okay.
I'll go ahead and give it a try.
Right on.
Everything, let's take a look at audio. So loudspeakers, audio consoles, they have varying different. I always think loudspeakers are just like cars, and you've got the Ford and the Toyota and the Lexus and the BMW, and there are discerning factors in each of those brands and each of those kinds of levels of car. It's not any different. You're going to look in the audio loudspeaker world, and you've got your premier class manufacturers, the BMWs and the Mercedes of them. So everybody from Meyer, D&B, L Acoustics, those are brands and manufacturers are going to have the higher end. And you've got JBL and EV and other people that are doing things differently, and they're just going to yield different results, but they're also going to have different price points, right? So all of these decisions get really complicated because every single one of them has a dollar sign attached to it, right? And there are all the same decisions. And I have been doing this long enough to see what happens sometimes is the marketing messages from manufacturers can create a very clouded environment, because there's some manufacturers that want to say you can achieve the same result but not spend as much money. And I'm just here to tell you, after 20 years, that is not true. Yes, I can get a car to take me to work, but my experience in a Ford Focus is going to be completely different than a BMW 325, right? They're both going to get me to work, but it's going to be different. So it's really hard just in an overarching world to say, what are some considerations? But working with trusted partners is a great way to work yourself through that. So taking companies like Luke's company and my company and understanding, are these partners that understand us and have done work for other people that are like us, that want to get to a place that we want to go and can help us understand what all those trade-offs are? That could solve a whole bunch of problems. And and I'm sure Luke's company is a lot like ours. We have customers that have worked with us for 10, 15, 20 years over and over and over again, because we've gotten to be good partners together, where they understand, we understand them, they trust us, and we're able to bring good counsel for who they are. That's probably if I had one thing that I could contribute to this call, is find that trusted partner, make sure they can lead you and they're not, you're not leading them, but they're a partner that can lead you. and just get on board with them and lock and load and go from there.
And then I'd say as an integrator that's helping guide decisions on technology, uh, we have a vendor, I forget what we call it. We've got a vendor rating scale. And when we let our manufacturers know, hey, you're number one in our hearts when it comes to quality, but your responsiveness is like number four. We would probably enjoy working with you more if you would be responsive. And we tell people that.
Yeah.
But so again, I have a service department. They are absolutely wonderful, but I really would just rather sell gear that doesn't break often. And if it does, can I get an advanced replacement within 2 years? And what's the warranty like? And if it's got a great warranty, but the service department is terrible to work with, I would rather go somewhere that has a great service team
Mhm.
and maybe 1 year less on the warranty. And then I know I'll try and stay brand agnostic, but I know that one of my camera vendors, uh, it doesn't break often, but when it does, my local rep has even met me on a job site with a demo camera and said, "Use this for 2 weeks while yours is getting repaired."
Mhm.
And that's because they've got boots on the ground representation with gear that know what they're doing. And then there are other brands where the online forums and communities are stronger than the actual response from the manufacturer. And there's obviously a budget difference. And if people say, we are really committed to using this brand, I say, that's fine. We are really committed to things that don't break very often. We have a different value system here. And at times have even walked away from projects where they've been very upfront. The number one thing that is driving our decisions is lowest cost. And we say we are not we sell Toyotas and we sell Lexus on this lot. And the same parent company owns both those cars, to stick with Bob's analogy. And they're both pretty reliable. There's a difference in how they drive. There's a difference in the features and how quiet the cabin is. They're not the same car, but they're both good. And there's different markets.
Yeah.
But I don't know what you would consider to be a very cheap, you're going to drive it for 3 years and it's going to die vehicle is. But we just don't sell those types of products.
Mhm.
And so understanding, having a good fit between the, who are you as a client, why are you doing this, and does that align with us as an integrator and the types of products that we are going to guide you towards. If we don't have a good alignment on quality, on price, on responsiveness, service, this isn't going to go well at all.
That kind of leads me to my next question, because I was wondering if either of you run into this with houses of worship, whether or not they are prepared for how often you have to replace AV systems, AV components. Like AV just doesn't last for 10 years, like for the
Mhm.
most part. You have to eventually update it. Like something's going to go bad. Are they prepared for that cost? Is that something that they realize they can't just like put something in and it's just there for life?
I'm gonna
Um,
I'm gonna jump in on that one because that has been a conversation I have had. So our company, as a company, the majority of our customers are in the very large house of worship environment. So um, everything, out of the top 10, I think 8 of them are our customers, and so, but we've had conversations with 2 or 3 of them that are the biggest names in house of worship that you would know. And they've come to us, and I had dinner with one of them at NAB last year, and he's like, we built our building 20 years ago. Everything, it needs to be fixed now. The roof leaks need to be fixed. The carpets need to be replaced. The house lights, 20 years ago we weren't installing LED house lights, and they're getting tired. They can't get the light fixtures anymore. The lamps aren't available
Yeah.
anymore. He's like, it's $1 million. It's $1 million for carpet. It's $1 million for these house lights. It's $1 million for the PA that's running out of its useful lifetime. Putting in new LED walls. He's like, and it's not just AV. It's the entire
Right.
campus. And so
Infrastructure. Yeah.
I say my answer is The people that I've run into are coming up with the, oh crap, time in their lives, right? That
Yeah.
so yet alone take that down into the smaller scales. So when even the biggest people are not ready, the majority of people are not, they're not looking at the long term. and I agree with you. If you need to be having at the most a 10-year useful lifespan estimate on most of the technology. And in video, just cut that in half.
Yeah.
Right. So I just tell people audio systems are expensive. Theatrical lighting is absurd, but video will bankrupt you.
Yeah, that's fair.
So, especially since it needs to be replaced so often. So I'm sorry, I kind of took over some of the time on that, but it's a pertinent conversation that I'm having with every single one of our customers now, is that are running into the life cycle question that wasn't thought of when they built it.
Yeah,
Which is
the only thing I'd add to that, because I agree completely, and it's such a big shift from analog. There are projects that we've replaced that have been working for 30 years with little to no service. It was just an all analog audio system, and then we'll upgrade it, and we'll add video, we'll add some network and some control, and all of a sudden our service department is getting to know them, when before, and I'm thinking Catholic churches where it just kind of runs itself, a full auto mixer. We didn't really see them in the last 20 years because it just worked without fail. And now, they'll have a power outage, and everything on the network is having trouble, and we need to go out there and reset things, and the capacitors blew on this power supply, and so now we're having to replace things, and it's discontinued. So it's, do you want to go on eBay, or do you want to upgrade this, which also, that'll have to be upgraded. So this the usable life of gear. But then also, because technology is refreshing and upgrading, people don't want to have the same quality for 30 years, because and maybe this is what's the guy at Intel? Just the rate at which things improve and
Or
Moore's law. Thank you, Gordon Moore. Just the quality of things improves so much. You can really see and hear that difference and realize, it was good in 2014 when we bought it, but we are really outside of the bubble on what people are expecting and what is capable. And that's a good time to dump it into the youth area, like everyone does. But the other way around that, going back to what we both said earlier about having a good partner, is for some of our bigger clients that do have a larger or growing congregations, we'll get together once a year or so and say, what are some of the systems that are starting to age out? What technologies are available to replace them? What is some high level budgeting for what it could cost to replace that? And don't hold me to it, but if I had to take a guess, I'd say you can last for 2, maybe 3 years, no problem, but you're really starting to run into issues after that. Or we might say, the manufacturer has EOL'd this and they'll still support it, but if a card goes bad, you're not going to find a new card anywhere. And so that sunset is going to happen in 9 months. So we'll make it through 9 months, no problem. There'll probably be an aftermarket for this stuff for about a year after that. But it might be time to get rid of this video switcher since you can't get those cards anymore. Let's do a 2-year budgeting cycle ahead of time. And so having someone to sit down regularly once or twice a year and talk about changes in technology, talk about what systems are aging out. You're not surprised with this. It failed. It's $1 million. And what am I going to do for 3 months while I'm waiting on equipment? We can avoid that catastrophe.
And it'll probably then help affect the budget, because if they're planning for it, then they're not all of a sudden like, oh my God, I have to spend $3 million.
Right.
And then also, what are they not buying? Because at that point, it's like, okay, I know that in a year, I might have to spend $500,000 on AV just to keep things maintained.
Yeah.
Maybe I won't purchase 3 school buses and do an update for the for the education wing of our building, because I know that's coming. And so they will, it's really terrible if they make a big purchase on something that's not AV related, or they, they start plant another church, and then something breaks and they're hit with $1 million and they're just out of cash. And so they just have to band-aid it together.
Yeah.
And it makes a big difference.
Yeah. And it's hard to be on the other side of the table with the customer. New helps create momentum. So congregations love it when they come in and they have the new room, they got the new carpet and the new chairs and the new LED wall and the new speakers, and maintenance doesn't drive any kind of momentum.
We spent how much for it to stay the same?
Right. Exactly. But it is very important. Like Luke said, we worked with a customer right here in Atlanta very recently, starting 3 years ago, when we knew that a vendor said, hey, you're on maintenance for this. That maintenance expires October 2024. And as of that point, we've end of life the program. We're not guaranteeing that you're going to get parts for that product anymore. So we were able to take that information and get a capital budget in front of management, the church executives and leadership teams, et cetera, to say, hey, this is happening 2 years from now.
Yeah.
It's a real exposure for us because it happens to be their video matrix router. It's the core and brain of the entire significant video system. We knew it was going to be over $500,000 to replace. It's a lot better to tell somebody, hey, 2 years from now, I need $500,000 than it is, I need $500,000 tomorrow. And by the way, we can't have church for 3 months because we have to wait for them to get in.
And from an integrator's perspective, you do that. Again, it's just great for your relationship, keeps other integrators out of your relationship with them. But then they'll say, great, we can set aside $50,000, every quarter and get there, no problem. But then again, if you can afford to change out the infrastructure and then add something else, we can budget for that 2 years in advance. And then instead of, hey, church, we spent $500,000 on infrastructure, we spent $750,000 on infrastructure and a few new cameras. Here's what we're doing with them and why that was a good idea.
Mm-hmm.
The old matrix switcher didn't have the capability to do this. Since we knew it was going to need to be replaced, we planned ahead 2 years in advance, and now this is how it's changing. So you're able to add value by looking forward.
100%.
Yeah. So a big buzzword right now in all corners of AV is immersive. And we're kind of entering that with houses of worship as well. So I wanted to ask about how you guys view and approach design and implementation of audio video systems, lighting systems to help create, an immersive environment for those who come to worship. If that is something a church or other house of worship comes and asks of you. And either of you who want to answer that first can.
No, you're not going to do it if you're a liturgical church. It really starts off with, how do you view worship as a faith? And so the Catholic Church is never going to do anything immersive in their sanctuary. Their fellowship hall, absolutely, that's open for grabs. But in your sanctuary, your traditional Lutheran churches, your Presbyterian churches, all of your liturgical churches, they're going to probably be very against those types of changes. And so it really does come down to more of your production heavy, maybe broadcast focused contemporary churches. I will say we've done a few. We haven't done a great number, but it's very driven by what capabilities do they have in-house. Again, I'm not going to do 360 degrees spatial. I don't typically have a rotating stage in the round inside of my church to where my drums are actually moving around the room and I need to follow that spatially just with my ears. I think there's great opportunities for L Acoustics to use their Lisa processor to do some very cool spatial things on a stage, and that If you haven't heard it, is absolutely incredible and adds wonderful value. And I've got a few churches that are budgeting and gearing up for that type of an upgrade. But those are churches that I would say have mastered the use of their space, that have mastered the operation and the technical training and staff, which is significant to do that. That's in your top 5, maybe 10% of churches out there. But it really starts with, again, who are we? Why is this going to add value to our mission as a church in our community? And do we have the infrastructure, team, training, and processes to do that and to continue doing that?
100% echoing everything that he just said.
See, there's not enough tension.
But there's everything is about people. Story conquers everything. Story trumps, right? So creative people that can know how to tell a story, then bringing the technology around the storytelling is where that is winning right now. It is incredibly expensive. I have conversations with our church clients all the time. Let's not try to outcompete Disney, because we're not going to, right?
Fair. Yeah.
So to say that, hey, that looked really great on the Taylor Swift Eras tour, so we didn't need more lights and more video, more everything. The thing is, like, do you have the storytellers, and do you have the people who are creating the scripts and the content around what it is you want to do?
Yeah.
Lots of tech people think that, well, I can just go to my pastor and I can tell them, hey, we need LED walls, right? Or we need a big center LED wall. That's even in the mid-tier churches, everybody wants like more LED and more video. The Elisa technology, I'm going to echo Luke, it's amazing, right? So it's a completely different new experience when you have the content, when your band and your music director understand what it means to produce music spatially.
I mean, how many churches would you say are even using stereo systems to their potential?
Well, not very many. And I'm going to throw that back on us, because there's a lot of our colleagues in the industry who don't even understand how to design stereo systems for a room effectively, right? So it's just, and then mixing for that. And when you have a large room, let's say you have 1,000, 1,500 seat, 2,000 seat room, you can have stereo system, but where is it stereo? Who's hearing stereo?
Yep.
Right? Because
where is it reversed stereo?
Right. Where is it reversed? And there's all those conversations have been had for a long time. And it's all, again, everything comes back to the content. And even the LED content, it's just not easy. You might be able to say, hey, I'll throw up ProPresenter and I'll put a bunch of graphics on the background. You're spending a lot of money for a big LED wall if that's all you're doing. Right. And that's not telling a story. That's not moving your audience from one place to another. So immersive is a hot buzz button.
It is.
But there's very, very few people, there's very few church organizations that could use it in a way that's going to be effective and that is going to make a ministry impact.
Caveat though is the role of the church can extend outside of Sundays, being a hub for the community, being a meeting space for folks that don't have a medium to communicate but have an important message. Church can play a big role in that. And so who are we and what are we doing? And does this align with our values? Church I worked with last year had a pipe burst in Texas. It got down to like 0 degrees and our pipes are not built for that. Bathroom exploded. People were snowed in. It was 4 days until they got to the church and found it. And I think they got like a $2 million check from the insurance company just for the renovation. And then they said, this system's been here for a long time anyways. Let's upgrade instead of just put it back together the way it was. But they are a Church of Christ. They do not use instruments in their worship. It is a cappella. They all sight read music. It is super cool. But they said, we want to make sure that we have a sound system that can be used for the local high school's battle of the bands, that we can have marriage seminars in here and they're able to play pumped up music in between the talks, and just create a general feeling that people are excited to be here. And so, uh, or even when we do play, program music, we want it to be just as robust as someone that uses full instrumentation. But they understood that their purpose as a church was more than just for the people that went to that church or were
Yeah.
interested in going to that church. And so that affected the way that they use their budget, use their dollars. And so looking at immersive technology again, who would use this room if we have the technology that isn't using it as a result? And being able to be others focused and to decide that is a good use for our dollars for people that don't go to church here. It's a big spend, but it creates opportunities that didn't exist.
Mhm.
Yeah. A lot of really good points. Um, I wanted to also kind of talk about, like, we talked a lot about audio already, but let's talk a little bit about best practices when it comes to leveraging like live audio engineering. Because when it comes to doing something that's really going to immerse people, if a church comes in and says they want, immersive, a lot of times I feel like the best way to do that is through audio. So how do we feel like we can leverage live audio engineering to kind of enhance this like emotional connection that people have when they, go to a house of worship service?
I would say start by making sure you have a great band and great talent on the stage, right?
That's fair.
Just start there. And then if you have that, then adding in the other components of it are going to come more naturally. And there are some, the manufacturers, loudspeaker manufacturers have really, they've developed now, and the immersive audio experience is available to more people. But you need to have great talent. You need to have really good. Your Sunday morning volunteer sound person is not going to mix an immersive experience well for people.
Yeah.
Right? I remember when I first started here, there was no such thing as immersive audio then, and it was just about like bigger, better PAs. And my question to people was like, "Hey, if I put in this loud system for you, am I just going to help you suck louder, or is this going to help? Do you have the underlying talent, the musicians, the people who know how to mix to take advantage of the high fidelity that we're going to bring here?" So again, everything going back to people. The Elisa, the soundscapes from D&B and Acoustics are game changers. When churches get to a point where they can check off all the prerequisites, and now they're going to say, we have a large enough venue, we have the kind of talent, we have the story we want to tell with that technology, it's really going to be getting people in the seats then and not letting them watch online is going to be even more important, because it can be quite a moving experience.
I don't know how this connects entirely, but it was almost kind of a sad experience I had with a potential client. They presented themselves as an undefinable worship style, and we don't just do contemporary, we don't just do traditional, we don't just do American music, and so we need a system and an experience that is versatile and keep up with that. And I said, well, sure, we can absolutely do that. We could do variable room acoustics and change the reverberance time for the style of music you're doing. So if you want to use an organ or you want to do some timpani drums in an orchestra, go nuts. And then 2 songs later, you want to break out your electric guitars and your acoustic drum set. Again, we can change the room, no problem. Or we could just pad the heck out of the room and put in like an e-acoustic system or a constellation system, and we can electronically adjust the room, no problem. Here's the budget. And then we started looking at their broadcast online, and we said, no, this is just Hillsong. Every week, it's just Hillsong music. And Hillsong music is great. I like Hillsong music. But I'm not seeing any variation in your worship style. And I think they got offended by that. And I think that's why they went with a different integrator. and that other integrator specializes in patting the room down and not changing it, and it sounds fantastic. I've been to some services over there. They did a great job, but their understanding of who they were, what their music was, and what their worship style was very different from the perception that they are marketing out in public. And that affected how we approached them, how we communicated with them, and ultimately our ability to work with them. I don't think that would have been a good fit from an alignment perspective because of our inability to communicate with each other. Um, but again, understanding what is immersive going to cost, how are we going to use it, and do we have the talent to really back that up and make it a worthwhile spend? Uh, that can be a really difficult discussion to have. And if you help people realize a truth that they didn't understand, it's probably not going to end well for you. Uh, but it's something that they may need to hear.
Yeah. That's really good. Do you guys want to talk about user friendliness for a second? Because, a lot of times with these systems that are put into place, it is a volunteer who is running that system for, whether it's worship on Sunday or, at temple on Saturday. Like, it's going to be a volunteer who's running that. How hard is it to meet the expectations of these houses of worship who it sounds like they constantly want bigger, better, more advanced, to bring, everybody together. But at the same time, with a bigger, better system comes oftentimes a more complicated user interface. I
Understanding
don't know.
who you're designing for is really important. So you're using you got to be this tall to ride the ride. It's a wonderful analogy. There is a minimum competency required to operate these systems, and you could compromise feature sets in order to have more user friendliness. That may or may not be a good idea. So you have to define on the outset of the project, what skill level are we designing for? Because even the dumbest lawyer passed the bar.
Yeah.
But if we design for someone who can meet that minimum requirement, that's great. But I've gone into other projects. We've taken over a client from a previous integrator, and we have ripped out the touch panel and just put in a potentiometer for volume. Run it through an auto mixer, and they say this works really good, and it doesn't need firmware updates, and it doesn't need anything. It just operates. And then there are other people where, well, we've got our Sunday morning use, and we've got our ladies Bible study on Tuesday, and we've got Wednesday night youth, and we've got a Sunday morning contemporary and a Sunday morning traditional. And we still would like an auto mixer, and we would like it to be fairly hands free. But if I could just push a button, 90% of the settings go to where they should go for that appropriate service. Well, now all of a sudden a potentiometer is not good enough. You do need something like a touch panel, and then you need the ability to go into and instead of an assembly mode, go into a manual production mode. So now I've got my console and I'm bringing that in. So understanding who the minimum competent person that's going to be operating the system is, and making a commitment that that volunteer may not be here in 5 years, but that is still the level that we are going to design for, is important, with the understanding that if we upsize power, conduit, infrastructure, we can change our minds without spending a ton of money in the future, no problem.
I think the ease of use conversation is very important, especially like what we've seen is the successes that we've had in building ease of use systems for some of the non-main ministries, kids ministry, midweek Bible studies and things like that. And the newer technologies from Crestron and QSC QSys, and the ability to automate tasks and give people simple, intuitive, thinking of it like getting in their car, right? You see how the car automation, I'm like, we have to think like car automation engineers, where it needs to be, and it's not easy, to build those user interfaces where almost anybody can walk up and understand what to do. But every time you do that, you realize we're putting a box around something, right? So we're making doing one thing incredibly easy, but that means doing the other things becomes more difficult, which a lot of times is the goal. I want to create a room. I want anybody to walk in there, hit the button, turn on the projector, and have the fader for their microphone. And that's it. But when we do that, we make it that easy, then we rule out the other options. And people have to be comfortable with that. And well, we can, and there's all kinds of techniques around that. You can create the button that says, go to the next level, cha-ching, and so, but you can create those in, but every time you add those in, you add more complexity. So working and identifying where's that slider need to be for ease of use to more complex, and thinking of that user interface the way, people are, I think being a user interface designer for companies like a car company would be a very interesting job. And finding out where you thought, wow, I thought that was the easiest thing in the world. You bring in all of your, user panels and nobody can figure it out. And you're like,
Yeah,
that happened. But I think we're finding that the automation technology is doing those, especially if it's not in a main worship center or in a large worship center, a lot easier to do as long as people are okay with the box that you create.
And there's not a ton of user interface that we have any effect over inside the worship center, because again, if someone says, well, can't we just put all this on a touch panel? I say no. You have a band that is a dynamic subject. If you really could just set all the faders at the same level and walk away, then you need an auto mixer. You don't need a mixing console, because nothing is changing week to week that requires an operator. But again, if you've got a band, if you've got guest speakers coming in, if you've got things changing, you need an operator, you need faders, and that is not a user interface. That is a tool.
And if you're going to take it out of the audio, the ease of use in doing a video production, the video production that we're doing here right now today is a lot different than a multi-camera live event broadcast would be, right? So there's no room here with some director saying ready camera one, take camera one, right?
Yeah.
But we have this box of this product we're delivering that's different than saying, oh, I'm gonna have 5 different camera operators, a gym camera, 2 cameras on the stage. Now I need a room where people that communicate. I've just increased the complexity, and I've taken it away from something that somebody sitting in front of house with 1 or 2 buttons can achieve, and making it incredibly more difficult. And that's just because of the design, the product.
Do you guys ever feel like there is a line between, technology and, maybe the technology is at a space where now it's distracting from what's happening on that stage? And where do you feel like that line is, or does it depend on the house of worship?
It's the person pushing the button. It has nothing to do with the technology. So we'll keep this in a religious context. The Apostle Paul talks about how nothing is good, or nothing is bad in and of itself. It is the corruption of good things that is bad. Money is good. The love of money is bad. Sex is good. Sex outside of marriage is bad. And so lights are wonderful, but maybe a baptism is a good time to use a strobe. Maybe it's a bad time. It really depends what type of experience you're trying to create. But you can misuse every single tool that we have created for worship technology, absolutely. But someone has to be making the decision, and unless they are clumsily pushing the wrong button and they didn't mean to do it, someone is misaligned of how do we want people to feel when they come into this space and engage with us.
Yeah. You just made me think of those Instagram memes of the worship songs where the drummer starts going into the drum solo in the middle of the worship song, and the rest of the band just starts looking at him.
Yeah.
So,
what are we doing?
Yeah, what are we doing here? I think that just became distracting. But nothing about a drum set is inherently
distracting
in and of itself. So I think that the same is true with the technology. There are challenges. I had a conversation with a customer just 2 days ago, and we were like, you're building an architecturally significant space here, and we need to find a way to illuminate the platform and to reinforce the sound. And inherently, that means somebody's going to see the instruments that do that function. Who's going to not be okay with that?
Yeah.
You know, and they were like, oh, there's going to be a lot of people not okay with that. I was like, okay, just so that we all get out of the pool and look everybody in the room and go, everything is application dependent, right? And so in that particular space, we're going to work really hard to find solutions that minimize that aesthetic impact, right? I call it when sometimes when you put in, it may even be the right solution for a nice line array of loudspeakers to work from the front of the back of the room and get everything done right. But the visual acoustics of that upset some people, right?
and how much do they donate to the church?
And so we just need to understand the audience there. And
Yeah.
so, and then everything else is art.
We one of our competitors on their website, they've got this very liturgical church, and they've got this probably 15-foot tall crucifix hanging above the altar, and then there's this steel semicircle with these point source cabinets on top of it, and the angle of the picture, these boxes are just right over Christ's forehead. So we refer to that as the crown of horns, because it's this beautiful liturgical space, and they just didn't attempt to blend it with the architectural aesthetic at all. And it was a very high finish, beautiful space. So I know that they were making budget driven decisions towards the aesthetic, not just what is it functionally. And again, you're going to pick an architect that can do it. You're going to pick a general contractor that has the ability to build it to be that beautiful. You are picking materials that cost more because they can do this. And then if your AV integrator or designer or both are not involved early enough and are not communicating at that level and are not providing examples of what it could or will look like, at that point, I mean, what are you going to do? Mm-hmm. They did exactly what they said they would do. You can't, we'll take it back. We're not paying for that. You didn't read the contract. You didn't vet the design. You picked a poor partner.
Well, as we're winding down here, I had kind of one last question for you guys. And that is like, this is kind of just encapsulating everything we've been talking about. So technology is obviously going to continue to evolve. It's doing it every day. So with that said, what future trends do you anticipate seeing in the intersection of technology, spirituality, artistry for houses of worship? And it's a really big question, so y'all can take your time for answering that if you want.
I think the one that I see is the people who are going to understand how to really, really use social media in connection with their live experience and the community that they are, right? That's a trend that's only going to get more and more powerful. And I think that the churches that can understand that, how do I create an experience that people will want to gather to? And then when they're there, put them in community where there's connection. I think that, you've heard the news articles of, the loneliness endemic, right? And things like that. I think that houses of worship, the church with a big C, have incredible power over the next generation to impact things like that. And to do that by both gathering, but also connecting people in the way that they live and move throughout the world digitally today. So I think that's a really big thing you're going to see happening. I think that the live webcast, the Sunday morning webcast, is going to get to be passé, right? And people are going to figure out it's either something that because it's either going to be, that's the modern new era TV church, which has been around since the invention of TV. But the churches that are going to be like, we're a community church, we're trying to connect community, they're going to start to see that Sunday morning thing is like, yeah, we can, but understanding how to use the elements of our body and our community and connect with people in the social networks that are being created now, that's going to be a big power. So that's the one thing that I've been ruminating about lately. What I don't know is how AI is going to impact.
That's where I was going with it.
That is a huge can of worms.
Right.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
we're noodling that around. We're talking about that, not only with our house of worship customers, but we have a very large, theme park, cruise ship, hospitality entertainment is a big part of our company. And just talking to customers about how that's going to impact us. But in the house of worship particularly, it's so new. That's keep your eye on AI in church. And I don't know what the answer is yet or what's really going to happen, but that's going to be a big one.
Yeah.
But the one I can see that people are effectively using social media, they're winning now and they're going to win big over the next 10 years.
Yeah, no, I think that video is where AI is going to start making the first big impact. If y'all were at InfoComm this last summer, everyone's camera has AI. And whether it's the ability to recognize what human faces are and automatically frame them in a boardroom, or Sony, QSC, and Panasonic's case, the ability to just follow people around on stage as they're pacing.
Mm-hmm.
I think you're going to start seeing your cameras are going to start adjusting their gain and their iris and their saturation and their color and their white balance. And so you're going to get to a point for those entry to kind of mid-level churches that they don't have a team that knows what they're doing. They don't have the tools, and they really don't need a whole lot more of that. They would just like a good image. And so again, you throw 3 PTZ cameras running AI software into that. You push a button, and then they switch, they follow, they calibrate, they adjust.
Mm-hmm.
It's already starting to do that, and it's just going to keep moving down that road. I think you're going to see more people connecting their video and their audio and their lighting. They're going to have MIDI cues. They're going to have triggers, and things are going to get easier and easier to program. So again, there's 2 ways that you can look at AI. You can spend money on AI to reduce the number of volunteers you have, or you could use AI to allow the volunteers you have to do things that they can't do currently because they are busy doing manual tasks. And so it's really what's your current capacity and how are you planning on growing and improving quality.
That's something we've seen, the improvement of manual tasks or the reduction of manual tasks. I kind of get frustrated with manufacturers who call that AI. When I talk about AI, I'm looking at large language model generative AI, right? And that's where content is being created in a whole different way. And that's going to be that's something that's, I was just talking to our colleagues this morning. It's a conversation we're having right now of like, everybody keep your eye out. Where are you seeing the innovators applying that kind of generative thing into, spiritual discipline, spiritual development, congregations, community building, things like that. Very interested to watch that.
Yeah. Good points, both of you guys. So, actual last question I'm going to ask you both is, where can people reach out to you? What is the best way for them to do so if they would like to continue the conversation after today? Bob, do you want to start?
Sure. I would say clark.is. It's clark.is for lack of a better thing. That'll get you the webs, the Instagrams, Facebook. Just check us out anywhere there. And you'll find somebody at Clark who will help you out.
Perfect. What about you, Luke?
You can find us at eavi.com. I'm not as active on Twitter as I used to be, but at Luke Jordan EAVI. Yeah, I'm easy
Perfect.
to find.
And if you guys who are watching now want to scroll down, you can click on either of their headshots and it takes you straight to their LinkedIn pages. So we have that for you too. But I wanted to thank you both for hopping on here with me. You both have been fantastic, and it has been just a pleasure getting to just pick your brains for the past hour. So thank you guys both so much.
Thanks.